It's probably as important for humans as food and water, but much less is known about sleep than about nutrition. That's changing, with significant new research being done around the world and right here in Canada. Joining us now to bring us up to date on the science of getting a good night's rest, Dr. Adrian Owen, Canada Excellence Research Chair in Cognitive Neuroscience and Imaging at the Brain and Mind Institute at Western University in London, and John Peever. He is Vice President of Research at the Canadian Sleep Society. And it's good to welcome both of you gentlemen back to TVO tonight for this discussion. I figured we should set this up with a little clip off the top to give us some sense about the research that's going on right now into this area. Sheldon, go.
We really wanted to capture the sleeping habits of people across the entire globe. So obviously there have been many smaller studies of people in laboratories, but we wanted to find out what sleep is like in the real world. How do real people sleep? How much sleep do they get? And what effect is it having on their brain?
We had 44,000 people volunteer their time to participate in our study, which was really quite amazing.
People who logged in gave us a lot of information about themselves. We had a fairly extensive questionnaire. They told us things like what medications they were on, how old they were, where they were, what sort of education they'd received, because these are also factors that might have contributed to some of the results.
Okay, at the time of that taping, they said 44,000 people participating in the survey. What'd you eventually get up to?
10,000 eventually. 10,000 did everything that we wanted them to do. We started with 44,000 people who said they were interested in participating, but of course, some people didn't complete everything. We needed an hour of everybody's time. So eventually we got down to almost 11,000 actually.
Almost 11,000.
Yeah.
And that is an adequate number to gain a greater understanding of what you wanted to find out?
I think it's a very good number. I mean, what we were really interested in was being able to carve the data up into how it might change over the age span, how different people with different types of habits might be affected by sleep. So getting that sort of number, getting almost 11,000 people allowed us to do just that.
And you did get a good demographic in terms of men versus women and old versus young and all that?
We did. Actually, we got very good take-up from people really between about 18 years of age and 100 years of age. So we got a very, very good spread of people.
And what'd you have them do?
So we got them all to log in and tell us a bit about themselves, mostly about their sleeping habits. We're not really interested in a single night with no sleep. We're interested in sleeping habits and how much sleep do you generally get and what effect does it have on your brain or your cognitive function. So people answered an extensive questionnaire, told us about that. And then they did some cognitive tests to look at things like their decision-making ability, their reasoning, their short-term memory and their attention span. And we were really interested in understanding how the amount of sleep that you generally get affects your performance on these cognitive tasks.
What do you see as the value in that work?
Oh, this study brings an enormous amount of information to the scientific community. I mean, I think Adrian was very humble, but 10,000 people is really a world record in terms of how many people have been studied to look at their sort of native or natural sleep amount. So it's really a tour de force in the amount of information that was generated. And the real value of it is because so many people were sort of asked about how do you sleep, how much do you sleep, and then how do you perform cognitively based on that amount is really important. And I think that the single most important thing, at least from my perspective, was that it came up with just under 8 hours, between 7 to 8 hours seems to be the optimal amount of sleep reported that people did best on these types of cognitive and reasoning type of tests that they were asked to do. And this is really important because the scientific community needs hard, cold data to be able to tell your audience how much sleep they need, and this study contributes enormously in that regard.
So 7 to 8 hours per night is optimal. How many people actually get that in your view?
Almost none. In fact, we found on average people were getting about 6.4 hours sleep. Over half the sample were getting less than that. So basically people are getting more than an hour's less sleep than they should be getting if they really want to be performing at their peak.
So that means more than 7 hours over the course of a week, more than 30 hours less sleep than they need over the course of a month. Keep doing the math over the course of the year. The implications of all of that are what?
Well, they're huge. I mean, we said in the paper that even in Canada, the loss due to people losing sleep, people losing work time, turning up late for work runs to billions of dollars in Canada alone. It's a huge problem. I mean, many people, and this is one of the reasons we got into this study, is many people, I think, see it as a matter of pride. I can get by on 4 hours sleep, and the truth is they can't. They might think they can, but actually they can't.
How about accidents on highways? How about relationships with other people? Build it out for me. What are the implications of all of us getting less sleep than we need?
I mean, Adrian said it very well. I think one of the things that we need to socially change is the perception that you don't need sleep to do a good job in your world. I mean, I think pride. A lot of my colleagues will sort of boast almost that, oh, I've been working so hard, I haven't slept, sleep isn't that important. And the National Sleep Foundation in the US has this beautiful phrase that I've plagiarized, and that is, sleep is just as important as diet and exercise, only easier. And I think this is a really important thing for people to hear. You go to the doctor, they say, you got to eat well, you have to have a certain weight, in order to do all those things to keep healthy, you need to exercise and have a healthy diet. But only in the last 5 years has sleep really come into that equation, that it really is an important aspect of your overall health and well-being, both mentally and physically.
It's not just the number, though, right? It's our perception of how well we sleep that matters as well. Help us understand that.
So I think for the most part, people really quite firmly understand how they sleep. So you, I'm sure, have had a bad night of sleep and you've understood you've had a bad night of sleep, and you've had a good night of sleep and you've understood it. But there's a really curious biological phenomena, and those are people who have what is called sleep state misperception. And there are people who sleep incredibly well, but they will actually go to see their physician, they'll have a sleep study because they say they cannot sleep. And then they go to see a sleep specialist, they hook them up to record brain activity, which is our best index of how you're sleeping. And lo and behold, the study comes back, you slept perfectly, beautiful 8 hours of normal sleep. That patient will tell you, I did not sleep all night. And this is a really remarkable phenomena.
Why is that mismatch there?
It's a good question. The best answer that we really have at the moment is, again, if you use these electrical tools to record brain activity, there are different waves of activity produced by the sleeping brain and the waking brain. And people with this perception that they don't sleep well seem to have more frequencies of waves that are wake-like in nature. And so it could be just this band of brain activity seems to give them the sense that they're having a poor night of sleep. But overall, everything else looks healthy and normal.
In an article covering the results of your study, we learned that it has been estimated that the productivity lost annually due to chronic partial sleep deprivation costs an estimated $21.4 billion in Canada alone. Let's unpack that a bit. Chronic partial sleep deprivation is what?
So that's what we were really interested in, which is that how people's lack of sleep over a prolonged period of time might affect their brain function or their cognition. We've all had the experience of going out and maybe getting 3 or 4 hours sleep and being very, very groggy the next day. That was less interesting to us than, well, how is it for all these people that are getting about maybe 6 hours sleep when we now know that 7 to 8 is what they should be getting? So it's chronic partial sleep deprivation. And for many people, in fact, for more than half our sample, that's a normal way of life. And these people aren't acknowledging that this is not enough sleep, I'm not getting enough sleep, and perhaps they don't know the effects that it's happening, that it's having on their brain and their cognitive function the next day, because some of these effects are rather subtle. They're not at all obvious.
Can you go into some of what makes up a $21.4 billion sleep deficit, if you like, in the country?
Well, actually, my guess is that that's probably an underestimate because, obviously these are guesses, and people pull together a lot of information to try and come up with numbers like this. And in that case, it was basically based on loss of earnings, loss of revenue, people not turning up to work, these sorts of things. Now, what about, what we've revealed with our study is there's a lot of subtle cognitive deficits that are going along with people who are not feeling like they're staying up all night. They're just not getting quite enough sleep to be operating at their absolute optimum. And that effect, I think, is probably grossly underestimated because how can we really know what effect this is having?
We would, I think, John, be very concerned if, for example, airline pilots or police officers were chronically not getting enough sleep. We get that. Can you put in demographic terms, though, who the sort of most egregious offenders are in society of those not getting enough sleep?
I don't think there's adequate data at the moment to identify a particular group. I mean, there's certainly subgroups. Doctors are notoriously in the emergency room for extraordinarily long hours. And it's only in the last 10 years, in fact, that the insurance industry, the trucking industry, the airline industry has really identified that the loss of sleep is a real driving factor in the potential for airline accidents, shipping, car accidents. And there are now very firm rules in place for how long a pilot can work for in any given week. And the reason being very clear, very simple, that inadequate sleep produces mistakes, and those mistakes can be deadly.
But it's interesting. You talked earlier about the culture of macho, of being able to work as much as possible with as little sleep as possible. And I think it's still the case that med students do 36-hour shifts, and they're expected to grab, 15, 20-minute, 30-minute cat naps here and there, but essentially do the whole shift with as little sleep as possible. That's a point of pride among doctors. How do you change that culture?
The only way to change the culture is to do what we're doing right now, and that's have a conversation about it. To bring people, to realize that they can't do their job as well as they need to do their job. I have a personal family member who crashed the car, worked very long hours in the medical industry, and it was not sort of a point of embarrassment. It was more a matter of, well, I was a bit tired and I think I might have drifted off. I just like to make the analogy with drinking and driving. It used to be acceptable to say, oh, I crashed the car, I had a few too many. That's erased.
Right.
And I think it's really become a change in culture because, well, the law enforced it. And I mean, I think it needs to, at some point in time, become the law not to be able to drive or operate a vehicle while under the influence of partial chronic sleep loss.
Huh, interesting. Adrian, I talked to the mayor of Toronto about this. John Tory said, I think he's 64 years old, something like that. And he has said, for whatever reason, at this point in his life, he has no problem getting up at 5 a.m. every day or 5:30 and hitting the ground running and doing early morning events all the time. Is that unusual?
It's not terribly unusual. I mean, we've known for quite a while that people sleep less as they get older. One of the really interesting things that came out of our database was that in spite of the fact that people sleep less, they still need as much sleep. So the effects of partial chronic sleep deprivation, even as you get into your 60s and 70s, are the same. Now, this suggests that, yeah, sure, we maybe feel that we need less sleep or we're less able to sleep as we get older. But actually, these people, cognitively, in terms of decision making and their brain, everyday brain function, would probably be doing better if they did try and get a bit more sleep.
In that effort, John, to try to get more sleep, would you advise sleeping pills?
Good question, tricky answer to give you. There are certainly times when sleeping pills are helpful and useful. I mean, the one thing, however, I do find reasonably concerning about the concept of sleeping pills often stems from this concept that you need the perfect night of sleep. So we're having a discussion today about how much sleep you get overall and how much daily changes in that amount can affect your ability to live your life the next day. But there's a lot of data to suggest that the use of chronic sleeping pills has detrimental effects on your overall health. So if you look at survival rates or how long people who are chronically sleep deprived live compared to people who are taking sleeping pills, in fact, there's more evidence to suggest that the people taking sleeping pills have a shortened lifespan as opposed to insomniacs who don't take sleeping pills.
Interesting.
So some caution needs to be given to the use of sleeping pills.
How about this, Adrian? I will confess here that with the Major League Baseball playoffs on towards the end of October, I didn't get as much sleep as I should have. especially after Game 3 of the World Series, which ended at 3:30 in the morning, and I still had to be up bright and early the next day. However, I seem to have an ability to nap and then feel okay. I can grab 15 minutes in the makeup chair or something like that and seem to feel okay. Is that a way to, I mean, can that work over a sustained period of time?
Well, there's two answers I want to give you. I mean, the first is you may not know what it is that's most affected by your cognition. Most of us, when we think about brain function and cognition, we think of things like memory. Is my memory impaired relative to what I'm used to? Well, yeah, actually, we found that sleep deprivation over a long period of time didn't affect people's memories. And that's the thing that people usually identify with cognitive dysfunction. Right? What about your sort of decision making? You know, your decision making, every day, all of us make hundreds of decisions. They might be simple decisions like, shall I take the bus to work, or do I need to take a taxi to get there in time? There might be complicated decisions like, shall I marry this person? Shall I get divorced? Shall I lease a car? We're all making many, many decisions, and that's where we saw the problem with sleep deprivation. And the interesting thing is, you know, we don't all necessarily know that we're not doing that as well as we can, because, you know, where's the feedback? Unlike memory, where you know you've forgotten something, with decision making, you make the decision and you move on, and who knows whether it was the best decision you could have made. And our data argue that very often people are not making the best decisions they could after sleep deprivation.
Okay, but if you can't get the 7 to 8 hours in one block overnight, but you can manage to maybe catch up a little bit with 10-minute cat naps, say 2 or 3 times during the day, does that work out in the end?
The data, the science around napping is somewhat controversial, and it really stems from how long the nap is. So short naps, like you're taking in the makeup chair, are quite useful if you haven't had enough sleep the night before. Mm-hmm. But once you get into naps that are longer than an hour, you run into some problems, because when you wake up from the nap, you have this feeling of terrible inertia, or the inability to get back into the groove, so to speak. And so, you know, short naps can be very useful. Longer napping, it can have some pretty harsh effects on getting back into the groove after you've had one.
Good advice. Appreciate that. Adrian, tell us about some of the tests that people took to determine what cognitive abilities are affected by a lack of sleep.
Yeah, so these were tests that have been developed over many, many years in my lab and in other neuroscience labs around the world. And they've been shown to be effective in, for example, detecting early dementia and these sorts of things. So we know they're quite sensitive to changes in cognitive function. They measure things like our ability to determine what is the odd one out. So in one of the tests, we present 9 shapes. The person has to identify which is the odd one out. And it may be because it's a different color than the rest. It may be a different shape than the rest. It may be a combination of all of those things. And the test gradually gets harder. And this is a really good test at assessing how well your frontal lobes, the very front of your brain that we know is responsible for decision making and planning and thinking ahead. These are the sorts of tests that assess those sorts of functions: decision making, problem solving, odd one out. Other tests we had, it required that people solve simple problems in order to plan a solution to a simple puzzle. It's one of those problems that, you know, there are many games like this on the internet where you have to think through all the steps in advance to get to the answer. And again, those were the sorts of tests where we saw that people were having problems after not getting enough sleep. It's problems thinking ahead and working out the correct series of steps. And of course, this translates into the sorts of things we do every day. Every day we're making plans about how we get from here to there, what it is we need to do first before we get on and cook dinner later, and these sorts of things.
But I presume not every decision is affected in the same way. But I mean, there must, I shouldn't say there must, are there some cognitive functions that are affected by a lack of sleep and others that are not?
So we found memory was surprisingly resistant to the problems that one might entail after a lack of sleep. People's memory, by and large, wasn't affected. And I think this is very interesting, because I think, you know, memory is something that we all identify with. We know when we've got problems with our memory. And that's where our results differed also from the acute sleep deprivation studies. The studies that have been done up to now that have taken somebody, put them in a lab, kept them up all night, and looked at the effects of just one long night without sleep, and their memory tends to be affected. But over the long haul, over many months of getting just a little bit too little sleep, actually memory is pretty resistant, but your ability to make decisions, both simple and complex, is likely to be profoundly affected.
Now, John, I know you're not going to like this one, but too bad, I'm going to ask it anyway. If you get 6 really good hours, of restful sleep, is that better than 8 hours of very fitful sleep?
So you're getting at a real key question in the field of sleep medicine, and that is, what is more important, how long you sleep or how well you sleep? And all the available data to date suggests both are equally important. So you need to have a length of sleep that's appropriate, but you need to have a quality of sleep that's appropriate. So if you sleep, as you point out, if you stay in bed for 10 hours and say, hey, I was in bed for 10 hours, but you were only sleeping for 6 of them, then you have a problem. But if you're in bed for 7 hours and you get a quality 7 hours of sleep, that's much more important than having just stayed in bed but not slept well for the whole night.
Well, that does raise a question, Adrian, about those who, I guess there are some people who sleep more than 8 hours a night, right? They sleep a lot.
Right, right.
Is that good for you?
Well, it turns out that was one of the most interesting and unexpected findings from our data, which is that both too little and too much sleep is bad for you. And it's worth about the same. So once you get up above 9 or 10 hours sleep, the effect on your decision-making and reasoning ability the next day is rather similar to if you were just getting between 5 and 6 hours sleep. So you've got to get in that window between 7 and 8 hours. Too little and too much, both bad for you.
What's the implication of too much? Same consequences?
It's exactly the same. We saw exactly the same pattern of impairment. Now, we know less, and John can probably speak to this better than I can, but we know less about why that's the case. It seems less obvious, I think, to most people why too much sleep would be bad for you. There is an effect known as sleep inertia, which is this problem
I was going to say, lethergy, presumably.
Exactly, getting out of sleep. And it could be that was a factor in our results.
So that is not just an anecdotal thing. There's research to prove that you can actually be more lethargic the more sleep you get?
So there was a really fantastic study that came out just about the same time that Adrian's study did, looking at this concept of sleep inertia, but related not to sleeping 9 hours, but having long naps versus short naps. And after an hour nap, sleep inertia was horrendous during the day. So it was very difficult. And then the scientists who conducted this study did something really important, which is to image the brain of those people who were really sleepy after they had a long nap versus those who weren't too sleepy after a short nap. And they found that the parts of the brain that sort of work together to allow you to make decisions and remember various things seem to fall apart. So that the sort of the chitter chatter between the important parts of the brain that let you be you in a healthy way seem to break down after long naps. So it's possible that 9 hours of sleep may cause the same type of effect, to sort of cause things to sort of break down, and it would explain some of the data about making poor decisions.
Got it. John, let me follow up with this. Obviously, if you're traveling halfway around the world, there's going to be great difficulties adjusting to the time change and all that. But, we're in the fall back time of the year right now, right? Spring forward, fall back. It's only a change of an hour. And yet, one does talk to people who, even in the short run, have some difficulty just with that 1 hour of change in the clock as we move the clocks backwards. Any advice for how to deal with that?
Well, I'll go back to Adrian's study and many, many other studies that imply, and quantitative data demonstrate, that on average we're probably sleep deprived. 50% of the participants in Adrian's study reported getting only around 6 hours a night of sleep. So my recommendation would be to those 50% that's 5,000 of 10,000, take that opportunity and catch up on your 1 hour of sleep when you're given that luxurious benefit. The real problem with the time change isn't now where we fall back, it's where we spring ahead, where you lose that 1 hour. And people who are already sitting on the cusp of only sleeping 6 hours a night, all of a sudden they're affronted with 5 hours a night, and that 1 hour takeaway clear problems. There's an increased rate of people coming into the emergency room because of traffic accidents, for example. So losing that 1 hour in the spring ahead time has a quantifiable impact on human health and behavior. I
have heard people say, I don't get enough sleep Monday to Friday because of my job, but then I can catch up on the weekend. Does the data prove that that's actually a real thing?
It suggests that it is, and in fact, that's one of the good news elements of our study, which is that for those people who, the night before they took our cognitive tests, got more sleep than they would normally get on average. So for whatever reason, they got a good night's sleep. They did tend to catch up somewhat. They did tend to be better. So the suggestion is that if you even if you're chronically sleep deprived over a long period of time, one night can make a difference.
Let's finish up on this. How much more new information do you think you can still glean from the nearly 11,000 people that you used in your study?
Well, a huge amount. I mean, we had this opportunity. We'd set this whole study up. We knew we were going to try to get to thousands of people. We obviously asked them a lot of other questions that actually may relate to sleep. It may have nothing to do with sleep. So, for example, we asked people whether they'd ever had a concussion, how many concussions that they had, because now we're looking at whether how concussions might affect cognitive performance in the long term. We asked people how many languages they speak, because we're very interested in knowing whether speaking a number of languages is better for your cognition. And brain training, we looked at that as well, whether people were brain trained. So there are many, many factors that we can pull out of this data set. We're really at the very beginning, and I'm very excited about what else we're likely to find.
John, what do you still want to find out?
Well, I think what we really need to focus on at the moment, one of the things that the sleep community is really interested in is the link between sleep and dementia. So there's an enormous amount of data coming out now that's suggestive of the fact that short sleep amounts overall, as in Adrian's study, might be correlated with certain forms of dementia. It's a little bit early to make that definitive association between short sleep and dementia, but I think it's something, because dementia rates are just skyrocketing, and they impact 10% of the population in some cases. I think we really need to sort of tease apart how does sleep in fact contribute to dementia, or is it simply the other way around? You start to develop dementia independent of changes in sleep, and that may impact how a person with dementia sleeps.
So at the moment, you can't say that there is a direct causal relationship between the two. You cannot say that yet.
We can't say it yet in humans. There's very supportive data for this, but certainly the information coming out of basic science, which what I do, working with mice, looking at models of human disease, we know that if you take sleep away from a mouse, those nasty proteins that build up in brain cells that cause dementia are sped up. So the process that causes dementia is worsened in mice that sleep less. So we certainly have good evidence from the basic science perspective, but we're still on our way there to determining if that holds true in people as well.
Fascinating. That's John Peever, VP Research, Canadian Sleep Society. Adrian Owen, Canada Excellence Research Chair in Cognitive Neuroscience and Imaging at Western University. As I thank both of you for coming in tonight, sweet dreams to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.